I started taking photos of my apartment every day because something was moving when I wasn't home. The messages came from someone who couldn't send them. I don't know when I started locking my bedroom door at night. I live alone. There's no reason for it. But at some point it became something I just did, like checking the stove before I leave or looking through the peephole before I open the front door. It became automatic. And I think, if I'm honest with myself, it started around the time I'm about to describe. I'd been living in my apartment for about a year and a half. Second floor of a 3-story building in a pretty quiet part of town. Nothing special. The kind of place where you hear your neighbors sometimes, but never really talk to them. I liked it. I kept things clean, kept things simple. I had a routine: work, home, food, sleep. Weekends I'd go out occasionally, but mostly I stayed in. I'm not a paranoid person. I want to make that clear because everything I'm about to say might make it sound like I am. It started with the window in my kitchen. I keep it cracked most of the time. Not wide open, just tilted, the way you can with those European-style hinges. It lets air circulate without really opening the apartment up. I've done it since I moved in. But one evening I came home from work, maybe 6:15, 6:30, and the window was closed. Not just pushed shut, latched. The handle was turned all the way down into the locked position. I stood there looking at it for a few seconds. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed I must have closed it that morning and forgotten. Maybe I'd heard it was going to rain. Maybe I did it out of habit while half asleep. I opened it back up and made dinner. A couple of days later, I noticed the bath mat was on the wrong side of the tub. I keep it on the left. It was on the right, not folded, not moved dramatically, just on the other side. And again, I told myself, I must have kicked it or stepped off the tub differently. You don't pay attention to things like that, you really don't, but I noticed it, and for some reason I remembered it. The thing that made me start paying closer attention happened about a week later. I came home and my laptop was open. Not powered on, just open. The screen was dark, the way it looks when it's been asleep for a while. But I always close it. Always. I close it and I put it on the left side of my desk, against the wall. That's where it goes. It's one of those small things I just do without thinking. And it was in the right spot against the wall, but the lid was up about halfway. And I sat down and I stared at it. I touched the trackpad and the screen came on, password screen, nothing unusual. I closed it. I opened it again. I closed it again. I was trying to see if maybe the hinge was loose, if it could somehow drift open on its own. It couldn't. It stayed wherever you put it. I checked my front door. Locked, deadbolt engaged. Chain was off, but I don't always use the chain. I checked the windows. All normal. The kitchen one was cracked the way I leave it, but it's the second floor. There's no balcony, no fire escape on that side. Just a wall and a 2-story drop to a concrete path. I told myself I was being ridiculous. For the next few days, I started doing something I'd never done before. I began taking pictures of my apartment before I left for work. Not of everything, just certain things. The laptop, or the kitchen window, the position of the bath mat, the way the shoes were arranged by the front door. I felt stupid doing it. I felt like I was losing it a little. But I wanted to know. For 3 days, nothing. Everything matched. I'd come home, compare the photo on my phone, and everything was exactly where I left it. I almost stopped. On the 4th day, the chair at my desk was pulled out. Not a lot, maybe 4 or 5 inches. Just enough that it wasn't pushed in the way I always leave it. I looked at the photo from that morning. The chair was flush against the desk. Now it wasn't. I want to say I panicked, but I didn't. I just felt this slow, quiet dropping in my stomach, like the feeling you get when you realize you sent a message to the wrong person, but worse. Because I didn't know what it meant. It could have been anything. Maybe the building had maintenance come through. Maybe there was a gas check or a fire inspection. I hadn't seen any notice, but maybe I missed it. I emailed my landlord that night and asked if anyone had entered my apartment. He said no. No inspections, no maintenance, no reason for anyone to go in. I changed my locks the next day. I know that sounds extreme, but it was a simple thing. I bought a new deadbolt, watched a tutorial, and installed it myself. I kept the old one in case I needed to swap it back when I moved out. I also put a small piece of tape on the front door, near the bottom, where the door meets the frame. If someone opened the door, the tape would break. I read that somewhere once. For about 2 weeks, nothing happened. The tape stayed intact every day. The photos matched, and the apartment looked exactly the way I left it every single morning. I started to relax. I started to think I'd been imagining things. Maybe the chair had always been like that, and I'd just taken the photo at a weird angle. Maybe the laptop hinge was looser than I thought. Memory does that. It reorganizes things to fit a narrative. Then one night I woke up around 3 in the morning. Not suddenly, not from a noise. I just woke up the way you sometimes do when your body decides sleep is over for now. I lay there for a minute and then I heard something. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of weight shifting on a floorboard. A single slow creak. The kind the floor in my hallway makes when you step on the spot near the bathroom door. I held my breath. I listened. Nothing. No second creak. No footsteps. Just silence. And then the low hum of the refrigerator kicking on in the kitchen. I didn't get up. I want to say it's because I rationalized it as the building settling, and maybe that's part of it. But honestly, I didn't get up because something in me didn't want to see what was in the hallway. And I know how that sounds. In the morning, the tape on the door was intact. The deadbolt was still locked. Everything was in place, but there was a glass on the kitchen counter that I hadn't used. A clean glass, right side up, sitting on the counter next to the sink. I only have 4 glasses. I opened the cabinet. 3 glasses. I held it for a long time. It was dry. No watermarks, no smudges that I could see. It had been taken out of the cabinet and placed on the counter, and I knew I hadn't done it. I knew it, but I couldn't prove that, not even to myself. Because what if I'd gotten up in the night for water and just didn't remember? People do that. People sleepwalk. People do things in the dark and have no memory of it. I put the glass back in the cabinet. I went to work. I didn't take a photo that morning. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want evidence anymore. Maybe I was afraid of what matching would mean or what not matching would mean. I kept living there for another 3 months before I moved out. Nothing else happened that I could point to with any certainty. Sometimes I'd come home and feel like the air was different, like someone had been breathing in the space recently, but that's not something you can measure. That's just a feeling. Once I found a shoe untied that I was sure I had tied, but that's nothing. That's less than nothing. I moved out in March. I told my landlord I'd found a place closer to work, which was true. I didn't tell him the real reason. I didn't tell anyone the real reason for a long time, because the real reason sounds like nothing. A window, a chair, a glass, it's nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. And even now, in my new place, I lock my bedroom door every night. I couldn't tell you exactly when that started, but I know why. The second thing I want to talk about happened a few years before any of that. I used to walk home from my job at the time. It was about 20 minutes, straight down a main road, and then through a couple of residential streets. I'd been doing it for months without thinking twice about it. I liked the walk. It gave me time to decompress. There was this stretch, maybe 4 blocks long, where the street was lined with older houses. Not abandoned, but quiet. Some of them had lights on, some didn't. There was one street light near the middle that buzzed louder than the others and flickered sometimes. I passed it every day. One night in November, I was walking home later than usual, maybe 9:30. It was dark and cold, and the street was empty, which wasn't unusual. I had my headphones in, listening to something, a podcast, I think, and I noticed someone walking about a block behind me on the same side of the street. I didn't think anything of it. People walk places. It's a residential area. I kept going. When I turned off the main road onto the first side street, I glanced back the way you sometimes do. The person was still there, about the same distance behind me. I couldn't see much. Dark jacket, average height, walking at a normal pace, nothing alarming, nothing that would make you look twice. I kept walking, turned onto my street, got to my building, went inside. The next night, same thing. I left work around the same time, walked the same route, and about halfway down that stretch of older houses, I noticed someone behind me again. Same distance, same pace, dark jacket. I didn't think it was the same person. Why would I? Thousands of people live in the area. But I noticed. The third night I tested it, I wasn't scared. I was just curious. Curious in a way that felt almost casual at the time, but looking back, probably wasn't. I deliberately left work 5 minutes later than the previous 2 nights. I walked slightly slower on the main road. I stopped once to check my phone, standing still for about 30 seconds. And when I reached that 4-block stretch, I looked behind me. Someone was there. Same distance, dark jacket, same pace. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt, because it wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a quiet alarm. The kind that doesn't make you run, but makes you very aware of your surroundings. I kept walking. When I turned onto the first side street, I stopped again. I pretended to look at my phone, but I watched the corner from the edge of my vision. About 15 seconds later, the person turned the same corner. I walked faster, not running, just faster. I turned onto my street, got to my building, went inside, and looked out the window of the lobby. The street was empty. Whoever it was had either stopped or turned off somewhere. I started changing my route after that. I'd take different side streets, alternate between 2 or 3 ways of getting home. For a few days, and I didn't notice anyone. I started to relax. I told a friend about it over drinks and kind of laughed it off. He said it was probably just someone who worked near me and lived in the same direction. That made perfect sense. That was the obvious answer. But then there was one more night, a Friday. I'd gone out after work and didn't head home until around 11. I took a completely different route, a way I'd never walked before. It added about 10 minutes, looping around through a commercial area that was mostly closed up for the night. Empty storefronts, a laundromat with its lights still on, a gas station. I was passing a parked car on a side street, and I saw someone reflected in the window, behind me, walking, same distance. I stopped. I turned around fully this time. The person was about 40 meters back, and when I turned, they stopped too, just stood there. I couldn't make out a face. It was dark, and they were standing between two streetlights in that dead space where neither one reaches properly. Dark jacket, hands at their sides. We stood like that for maybe 5 seconds. I don't know what I expected. I don't know what I would have done if they'd moved toward me. But they didn't. They just stood there. I turned around and walked home. Fast. I didn't look back again. When I got inside, I locked the door and sat on my couch for a while without taking my jacket off. I never saw them again. Or maybe I did and just didn't recognize them. Without the context of that specific route, that specific time of night. That's what I keep coming back to, because the truth is, I don't know anything about what happened. I don't know if it was one person or 4 different people. I don't know if anyone was actually following me or if I built a pattern out of coincidence. Brains do that. They're designed to find threats, even when there aren't any. But I will say this. I moved away from that area about 8 months later for unrelated reasons. And one of the first things I noticed about my new neighborhood was that I never felt watched on the walk home. I didn't even realize I'd been carrying that feeling until it was gone. It had just become part of the walk, part of the route. That low, constant awareness that someone might be matching my pace in the dark behind me. I'd stopped turning around to check. I'd stopped testing it. I just accepted it as a feature of the walk, like the buzzing street light or the cold air. And I don't know what that says about me or about what was actually happening. I still don't. The last thing I want to describe is harder to explain because it involves other people, and other people make things complicated. I moved to a small town for work about 2 years ago. Not tiny, but small enough that you start recognizing faces pretty quickly. The kind of place where the grocery store has one cashier most of the time and the post office closes at 2. I didn't mind it. It was a change of pace. I rented a house on a street with about 10 other houses on it. Quiet, mostly older couples and a few families. The kind of street where people wave but don't really stop to talk. I got used to the rhythm of it quickly. Who walked their dog at what time, which houses had their lights on late, and which cars belonged and which ones were just passing through. After about a month, I started noticing something that I initially dismissed as me being new and not yet understanding the social dynamics of the place. People seemed to look at me a little too long, not in a hostile way, not in a way that was obviously wrong, just slightly longer than felt normal. The cashier at the grocery store, for instance. She'd hand me my change and hold eye contact for an extra second, like she was waiting for me to say something specific. the man 2 houses down who walked his dog every morning. He'd wave, but then he'd keep looking at me as I got in my car, tracking me all the way until I backed out of the driveway. I told myself I was the new person in town and people were curious. That's normal. That happens. In small towns, you're an event for a while. You're the new face. It would settle down. It didn't exactly settle down. It just changed. After a couple of months, the looking stopped. People seemed to lose interest in me the way you'd expect. But it was replaced by something else that I found harder to name. A kind of politeness that felt rehearsed. Like everyone was being friendly in exactly the same way, using the same phrases, the same cadence. The woman at the post office would say, "Have a good one," with the exact same intonation every time. The old couple across the street would both raise their hands at the same angle when they waved. I know how insane that sounds. I know it does. People have habits. People say the same things. That's not strange. But there was one thing that I kept coming back to. Every couple of weeks, when someone in town would ask me how I was settling in, different people, the guy at the hardware store, a woman I'd see at the gas station, a neighbor I'd only spoken to once, and they'd all phrase it the same way. Settling in okay? Not, how are you liking it? Or everything going all right? Or any of the dozen ways you could ask that question. Always settling in okay, with a slight emphasis on the okay, like the question was really about the okay, like they were checking on something specific. I mentioned it to a coworker once. She'd lived there her whole life. I said something like, "People keep asking me if I'm settling in," and laughed about it. She just nodded and said, "That's how it is here. People care." And then she went back to what she was doing. I waited for her to say something else, but she didn't. One night, I was driving home late, maybe 11 on a weeknight. I turned onto my street and noticed that most of the houses had their porch lights on. That wasn't unusual by itself. What was unusual was that my porch light was on too. I don't leave my porch light on. I hadn't turned it on when I left that morning. I was sure of it. I parked and sat in the car for a minute. The light was definitely on. It's controlled by a switch inside the front door. Someone would have had to have been inside the house to turn it on, or the switch had flipped on its own, which I suppose is possible with older wiring. I went inside. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was moved. The house was exactly as I'd left it, except for the porch light. I turned it off and went to bed. Over the next few weeks, it happened 2 more times. I'd come home and the porch light was on. Both times, nothing else in the house was disturbed. Both times the door was locked. I started leaving a small piece of paper wedged in the door frame, the same trick I'd used with the tape at my old apartment. It was never disturbed. Then I noticed something I can't fully explain, and I've gone back and forth on whether it means anything. On the nights my porch light was on when I got home, every other house on the street also had their porch light on. Everyone. But on regular nights, it was usually just a few, 5 or 6 out of 10. I started paying attention to this. I started counting, and it was consistent. On normal nights, some houses were lit and some weren't. On the nights my light was mysteriously on, every single house on the street was lit up. I don't know what to do with that. I've tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe there's a neighborhood understanding about porch lights that I'm not aware of. Maybe they all use timers. Maybe it was coincidence. 3 data points is nothing. You can find a pattern in anything with 3 data points. I still live there. Nothing has escalated. Nothing has happened that I could take to anyone and say, look, something is wrong. People are polite. The town is quiet. My house is fine. Nothing is missing. Nothing is broken. No one has threatened me or approached me in a way that was overtly strange. But sometimes I lie in bed at night and I look at the glow of the porch lights through my curtains. All of them, every house, all on. And I think about how I didn't turn mine on, and I think about how everyone keeps asking me if I'm settling in okay. And I think about the way the cashier holds eye contact for just a moment too long, and the way my coworker said, "That's how it is here," and then went quiet, and the way the old couple across the street wave at exactly the same angle every single time, like they've practiced it, like they've agreed on it. I don't know what any of it means. I'm not saying it means anything. I'm just telling you what I noticed, and I'm telling you that I notice it every day, and that no one, not once, has ever asked me anything other than settling in okay. As if there's only one question this town knows how to ask, and as if eventually I'm supposed to give them an answer that isn't just, yeah, doing fine. I just don't know what the right answer is. I'm not sure I want to find out.